So learning outcome 1, the electromagnetic spectrum is a family of waves. In common, they all travel at the same speed as light. And remember last year we met this, the speed of light is 3 times 10 to the power 8 meters per second. That's the main thing that they have in common. You could also list the fact that they all transfer energy, but then so do other waves. They're all transverse waves. But that's not really what defines them as belonging to this family. It's this idea that they all travel at the same speed that defines that. But what's different about them is that they have different frequencies and different wavelengths. And we need to be able to list them in order. So starting with the smallest wavelength, you can do it either way around. Right, we have gamma, X-rays, ultraviolet, visible light, infrared, microwaves, and they are usually just called radio waves. If you call them TV and radio waves, that's okay. And if I put a wee arrow then, that's in order of increasing wavelength. And if we use a different colour, and for a different arrow, put one the opposite way around, that order's increasing frequency. So gamma's got the largest frequency. Now it's up to you if you want to copy, but there is a kind of fairly commonly used mnemonic which can help you remember them in order. It's actually the hard one to get is X. Right? So we're using xylophones as our X, and that leads us kind of down the musical route. So good xylophones usually vibrate in musical rhythm. Learning outcome 2 is based on the research work that you did. Sorry, I like blue. And we're just going to try and copy this table. So name, source. We might abbreviate some of it. Right, detector. And use. Another phrase that you'll often get is application. So I'll go back to the same order that I listed in previously. So sources for gamma rays. We've got stars, some stars, and nuclear decay are the kind of two main sources we came up with. For a detector, I'm having to write quite small to fit this in. Photographic film, or what's called a GM tube, which stands for Geiger-Miller tube. But we'll do more detail on that when we get to the radioactivity unit. One of the main uses that we looked at was radiotherapy, which means killing cancer cells. Okay, for X-rays, there are man-made sources, right? So nuclear plants can produce them as well. But the main one is actually stars. The simplest detector to discuss is photographic film. And then we talked about medical diagnosis, and security. Right, different forms of scanning. For ultraviolet, we've got stars as the main source that you came up with. And our detector, once again, photographic film. And the uses that you came up with was sterilizing. Okay. Sunbeds is another kind of obvious one. Right. And they can be important, for instance, for people with vitamin D deficiencies. Children are usually, or not usually, but quite often born with a vitamin D deficiency because they're not exposed to sunlight while they're in the womb. And they sometimes need short bursts of UV lamps, right, just to help their body generate the vitamin D. So for visible light, we had stars. We did talk about, didn't we, very hot objects. So for instance, if you put a piece of metal on a fire and heat it up a lot, then it glows. An obvious detector, once again, photographic film. But you do also get things called phototransistors. Or in a camera, you might have heard the phrase CCD, coupled charge device. So the actual bit in your camera that picks up the light is called a CCD, right, or a phone. And the main use there, the obvious use, is for vision. Right, but you also get things like lasers, for instance, which can cut. Right, a laser is very focused, amplified light. So laser cutting could go under uses. So infrared, stars, hot objects. And once again, you get phototransistors that can pick them up. And we talked about thermal imaging. As a use. Okay, electrical circuits can produce microwaves, as can stars. And the detector there, you kind of need to learn, it's a new idea to you, I'm sure. It's called a diode probe receiver. And microwaves are used for cooking, for mobile phone communication as well. And lastly, radio waves. Right, once again, stars, circuits, and lightning. Right, lightning can actually produce quite a lot of the electromagnetic spectrum. And the detector could be called an antenna, also known just as an aerial. So the uses, TV and radio broadcasts, mobile phones again, and radar.